Hello, everyone, and welcome to a discussion on creativity and the moments of truth that lead to driving change for good. The events of the past year have brought clarity to what matters. The role of business in society has been forever disrupted. It's now inescapably clear that we have a responsibility to step up as both a force for good and a force for growth. But stepping up as a force for good doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey that's unique for each brand and each company. And it's not easy, especially on tough topics like bias, racism, and racial injustice. But no matter where you are on the journey, one of the most powerful tools we have is creativity. Creativity has the unique power to shape views, change minds, and drive change. Today, we'll discuss some moments of truth that have led to using the power of creativity to lead to change. We'll go behind the scenes to learn about what led to powerful creative work that has sparked conversations, built empathy, changed attitudes, and has hopefully started to drive change for good for racial equality. We'll introduce our panelists now. First, Tiffany R. Warren, President and founder of AdColor, Executive Vice President, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer of Sony Music Group. Tiff is recognized as a leader in the field of diversity. She's a talented strategist with 22 plus years of championing diverse professionals in the creative industries. Justine Armour, Chief Creative Officer of Gray, New York. Justine has 23 years of stellar creative experience across multiple agencies. Is the winner of 20 Cannes Lions and countless other creative awards. And Keith Cartwright, founder, CEO, and Chief Creative Officer of Cartwright, and co-founder of Saturday Morning. Another brilliant creative genius. With 23 years of experience, he's been nominated for 4 Emmys and a winner of 3 Emmys, among a slew of other creative awards. And I'm Mark Pritchard, Chief Brand Officer of Procter & Gamble. And I have the distinct honor to represent P&G brand builders from around the world and work with such amazing partners and people like Tiff, Justine, and Keith to create work that really matters. Welcome, everyone. Now, before stepping out and stepping up publicly, particularly on challenging topics like bias, racism, injustice, and equality, it's critical to do the personal introspection and work that gives you the insight, the courage, and eventually the resilience to turn intentions into action. So what I'd like to ask is for each of our panelists to share your personal moments of truth, when you found your voice that led to the courage of your convictions to use your voices for change. And Tiff, let's start with you.
I think my moment of truth actually changed my whole life, and my hope was the lives of others in terms of the feeling of invisibility that I often felt as a professional of color in the creative space. So I was asked to be the director of diversity at Arnold Worldwide, and I was super young and had just finished a tour duty at the 4As as their manager of diversity programs. I was going into management. I felt really, really happy, but it was incomplete. And so I had asked them very timidly, I said, I'm happy to be your head of diversity, but I just have this thing that I want to launch. It's called AdColor. It's an award show. Like I literally can't sleep. I'm hoping that I can launch it. And without even skipping a beat, the president of the agency, Ed Eskandarian at the time, who was a neuroscientist, literally said, it's not rocket science. We're here to help you launch that. And so that was my moment of truth. And of course, we all know where we've ended up. But being fairly young and finding my voice, it intersected with that moment of truth as well.
Amazing. Tell everybody very quickly, what is AdColor?
It was created to honor people of color in advertising, marketing, and media. And I would be remiss to not say that one of my favorite speeches of all time was delivered by Mr. Cartwright himself when he won the AdColor One Club Creative Award. So it's first and foremost a community, and then secondly, it builds on the achievement of professionals of color. And then I think now we're in the business of advocacy and helping brands discover the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So Keith, she just pitched it over to you. So what's your moments of truth?
Well, first, thank you. I mean, Tiffany has done so much for our industry. It's immeasurable, and I know she's been a champion, not just of myself, but other people of color in this business. For me, you know, I've had, as a Black person in this business, a lot of moments of truth. and sometimes moments of reflection. But it was really finding my voice in 2016, that horrible summer of 2016 when Eric Gardner and Philando Castile were murdered. I was in LA, and it wasn't as if I hadn't seen or recognized police brutality amongst the African American community, but it was just something about that moment where I felt compelled to do something. I reached out to my co-founders who happened to be in LA, and just said, hey, you know what, let's get together and have a conversation about what's going on. I feel like we need to have a voice in what's happening in our, and something that we need to do as a member of the African American community, the Black community. We need to say something. We need to stand up and have our voice heard. So we met up and chatted for at least 5 or 6 hours at the Rose Cafe here in Los Angeles. And that turned into a letter, which we sent out to Ad Age and Adweek, essentially, voicing our point of view on the role and responsibility of the advertising industry to have a voice in this moment. And we had no inclination that would turn into Saturday Morning, which is an organization built around using creativity, which I believe is one of the strongest forces in the world to dispel racial bias, specifically in the African American community. It's funny, one of the first outreaches was from you, Mark. We were all very surprised to hear your voice on the other end of the phone, and the rest has been history for us working with Procter & Gamble. So thank you.
Thank you for putting that out there and for accepting the call, because it's turned into something amazing, and we're just getting started. So, Justine, tell us about your moment of truth.
Thank you, Mark. Well, like you said at the beginning, I have worked in ad agency creative departments for 23 plus years. Most of that time has not been a great or a welcome thing to be a woman. So I have a kind of the similar experience to Tiff. I have this felt experience of being an outsider, and which deepened when I moved to America from Australia about 10 years ago. Racism is not one of the brand marks of America if you're a foreigner. It's definitely not one of the stories that got to me. And so when I came here and I started to sort of understand how serious this is, I really treated racism like a tourist. I watched it, but I didn't engage. I didn't bother to learn any language around it. I was probably not going to stay here that long, and it's not my issue, but then being a woman in advertising became very important. And then I found myself in leadership in America. And I had a moment a few years ago where I came across this concept of white privilege. And I realized that my relationship to racism here has absolutely nothing to do with being American or not. And here I am in this powerful position, and I have to understand my whiteness, and I need to grow up and stop being a tourist and understand the power of this position that I'm in. And I have to use that power to make an actual difference.
Yeah, it's almost like your destiny. But one of the most profound moments of truth for me was after I had done some work and been doing some work with our African American Leadership Network and our Hispanic Leadership Network, and did some films. And what I recognized is that I am half Mexican. My father was Mexican American, and his name was Gonzalez, but his adopted name was Pritchard. So I had a white name, and I was viewed as white and a white man throughout my life. So I had the privileges or the advantages of being viewed as white. And although I was proud of my Mexican heritage, I suppressed it during my professional career for fear of bias and racism and labels and other things that occurred. So as I was reflecting on this work that I've been doing with our organization, and then Tiff, who asked me to talk about these moments of truth, I came upon that moment of truth when I realized I'd been suppressing my Mexican heritage. And for the first time in my 30 plus year career, I publicly declared, shared, and embraced my Mexican American heritage at AdColor. What it did is it just opened the door for discussions and conversations and an amazing thing. And it firmed my commitment that this was my destiny, to use my voice for equality.
And I just want to say it gave other people permission to release that as well. There's so many notes that we received that after that moment about the courage that you displayed, in that moment. And to your point, Justine, the being a tourist, understanding white privilege. Again, when you share as an ally these transformational moments, you give other people permission to do so as well.
The reason why you asked me to do that speech is because we had just won the Mosaic Award for the talk. Shortly after that, we got some feedback that maybe we were missing something in the talk, and that feedback happened to come from Keith Cartwright and the Saturday Morning Group.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously love that film, but I think there was for us an omission, and it's not a rare omission in cinema and marketing. The black male figure, the black father, is often left out in the family nucleus and family infrastructure, and for us that was a unique bias that we wanted to at least bring to Mark's attention. There was a moment where the father was in the film, but he was sort of repressed. He was passive, and that at times can connote the wrong thing to others about the male figure in sort of the black nucleus of the family. So that for us was important. It was important for us to have that conversation with Mark, and then Mark, you took it even further and asked us to think about some creative work.
Yeah, and it for me is getting diverse views in the room was what was so important about that. So within a week, what we asked is Keith and his team to give us some work, and they came back with the idea of The Look.
Rise.
So Keith, what was really important about this is that was not the first cut we just looked at. We looked at many cuts. And in fact, I can remember this. In many cases, I was the only white person in the room. And when I watched it, it was like a gut punch, because what I saw was this blatant bias and racism and outright disdain in many cases. And I said, ooh, whoa, that looks like too much. While you and Jeff and the Saturday Morning Group and Damon and Eric said, no, that's reality. So we had to have a lot of discussions about this, because what we needed to do is to make sure that we could create something that the Black community would look at and say, yep, that's right. But that the white community could look at it, not reject it out of hand, and say, oh, I've done that.
Yeah, that was a huge learning moment for us. We came in and we wanted to make sure that every point of view that we had in this film was brought to light. And I think, Mark, when you brought up the fact that if we go too far, we may lose, white America, and that flies in the face of our intent. But if we don't go far enough, we may lose Black America. And that also flies in the face of our intent. So finding the line, creatively having a conversation about where we are and where this message needs to go so that both sides can come together and have meaningful conversations about the subject matter was one of the best experiences I had in the business. And it required having, to your point earlier, Mark, a diverse group of people sitting at the table, voicing their point of view, making sure that we understood each side and it was representative in the final product.
Tiff, give us some perspective on that when it comes to your experience. You've been at Omnicom for several years. You're now at Sony. You've got AdColor. What needs to happen?
When I started AdColor, the conversation was very much tied to, in terms of diversity, multicultural marketing. And I knew there was a place to talk about the individuals behind the work. It was often work adjacent that people were mentioned. And so for me, I thought it was important to sort of pull back the curtains and show the highs and lows, the joys and the fears of being in the creative business. And so in doing that, and not just speaking to the choir, meaning other professionals of color, what we did was we opened a dialogue between not only professionals of color, but current and potential allies and mentors, so that when you're in a room, when you're making creative decisions, maybe you'll think twice beyond just the marketing aspect of it, but also how this is going to impact society and the individuals that are working on that particular creative, piece of business.
It was so powerful to have those discussions because that's exactly the way it was. Diverse views in a room, having powerful discussions, so we could come to that greatest impact. And it took us a while, but we finally got there. But it actually set us up for the next moment of truth, which actually speaks to your building a circle of trust.
Yeah.
Because, and we all know this, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and that horrible day when George Floyd was killed. That was a moment where I think we all sat together and said, we have got to step up and make some changes here. In fact, Tiff, you and I were at a D&I summit at Adweek, and we spoke, and there were some very frank discussions about what was going on.
I think the key for me was to be really honest. And so I was looking months ahead. I was already 6 months ahead saying, keep the same energy. That's what I want. At the end of the day, I want this to be just as meaningful and for you to feel the empathy of the moment 6 months from now, because empathy actually leads to action. Sympathy actually leads to sorrow and inaction.
You fueled my energy exponentially in that discussion, because I came away from that discussion with an insight that what we needed to do is to get the white community to step up. This was no longer, on the shoulders of the Black community. So that evening, or I think it was that evening, I called Debbie Reiner and Justine and said, we need to talk because we need to do something. And the brief was very simple. We need the white community to step up. There's a lot of people out there who want to do something, but they're frozen. And so, Justine, how did you do it?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to do something quickly as well. And I think if you want to get to this kind of, really impactful, powerful work very quickly, you have to have very senior people in the sort of decision-making roles with high trust relationships who can be really vulnerable with each other. And like you talked about before, is this dynamic of psychological safety. You have to, those elements seem to be really important for this work that we just did. So, we had Mark, you were there, Mark, and Debbie from Grey, Keith was in the team, and our boss, John Petrulis, and me. And, we were very focused on the outcome, which is not coming at it with any ego. We're not trying to make an award-winning ad. We're trying to make a piece of communication that's really going to urgently shift people. Mm-hmm. And, one of the thoughts that we had that you talked about is that, and remember, it hadn't really, I don't think it had really bubbled up in culture yet. It certainly hadn't bubbled up in where I was looking, but there's the idea that the Black people were probably tapped out of this by now, and it had been proven that this Black community could not win this fight alone. What are Black people going to do? So we had to activate the white community to join this, this conversation and, take action. And so we just started writing our hearts out in a Google Doc, all of us, before you saw it, Mark. We wrote a about white privilege. We wrote it embarrassingly. We wrote it ugly and wrong and too much, and so there's a poem in there, and just everything was bad. But we had that kind of dynamic where we could do that with each other. And 36 hours later, we had this piece of writing that we brought to you that we felt was very powerful.
With inverted tongue, from whence does fulfillment come? And I expel from this mortal shell, where I die for living up. Though you someone I can't see, cry to me, and I do.
So, powerful film. Lots of things that many people have probably never seen before. So, for example, you brought the idea of let's show these words on skin, which was very unusual. So, tell us why.
It's one of the great equalizers, right? I mean, if you really look at the differences between us as humans, at most, sometimes it just boils down to skin tone. And if you look at, the racial conversations in history of this world spanning since, the beginning of time, it's absolutely ridiculous to, create any type of bias around our fellow man and woman based on the color of their skin. So that was the sort of the philosophical component of it. And then there was just the pure beauty and design of it, right? As an art director, looking at just the beautiful texture of black skin and white skin, the contrast of those two things, old and young, I think it created this sort of artistic layer on top of the beautiful music and words.
We also wanted people to really, that we needed the words to really land. So it became this canvas for like the thing that we had written. That was, and there was lots of conversation about how long it should be. And Mark, you had said many times, don't worry about the length. Let it. We need the full story to play out. And I think it's 75 seconds, which is extraordinarily long for a spot. But none of it could come out. It all needed to be there so we could bring people all the way through the message that we were needing them to hear. And on that, we should talk a little bit about some feedback that we got from Oprah.
We wanted to air this on Oprah's Where Do We Go From Here? So we decided to go ahead and send it to her team, and she saw it and she called me, which blew me away. We're debating whether we use privilege or power. And she said, don't use privilege. And she said, privilege, there are too many white people in the world who are a paycheck away from bankruptcy. You will lose the white community. You're trying to speak to the white community. Don't use privilege. And I said, how about power? She said, power? Got it. That's fine. How you use your power is a choice. So that was powerful input. So of course it came back, and that's where we landed. But it was a very good piece of feedback. Now it leads to our last closing, which is where do we go from here? Because actually, even some of those conversations were getting at a broader lens of the Black community and the Black experience. So that's something that we're now starting to work on. In fact, what we view is that the advertising community has such an opportunity to make a difference because we create more content than the entertainment industry. Saturday Morning has brought another idea for us.
It's called Widen the Screen, and we're stepping up for more equal representation in the stories that we create, the storytellers who are creating them. And by that, we mean the entire production supply chain, not just the director or the writer.
Keith, you were the one that really pushed us on this. So tell us why you think this is important and what we're doing.
Yeah, I think, one thing I was saying when we were working on this project with you, Mark, is that normalcy is freedom. And when we as a culture have the opportunity to just be normal, there's this inherent freedom that comes with that. The pressure of Black excellence for us in our community is daunting, and the relegation of the other side, which is struggle, and the expectation that the Black story is either about one of the two, excellence or struggle, leaves out so much of the middle. And that middle is Black normalcy, and that middle is freedom. So we need to start telling those stories to get society to recognize our culture as more than just the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And Tiff, how do we make sure that if we widen the screen, we widen behind the camera too?
Well, a colleague of mine, Azim Rashid, because for me, attribution is allyship. Anytime I get a juicy quote, I have to attribute it to who said it. But Azim said something really powerful. He said, there's 5 jobs in front of the mic and there's 500 behind.
Yep. Well said. And we're trying to widen the screen and widen the ecosystem. So thank you all for your amazing insights. Hope this has been useful to all of you who are watching. Find your voice. Seek out diverse views and voices, build that circle of trust, and step up to act together for good.